Welcome to the 1619 Project podcast. I'm Antonio Ruiz, and of course, my friend there,
Thomas Fields. On the other end.
I do that hesitation there because you're supposed to say who you are. So today we're going to talk about politics, a chapter on politics. And it's really an interesting chapter because it begins with talking about the 2020 election and Donald Trump's effort to basically disenfranchise a large number of voters by basically challenging those votes, which coincidentally happen to be in predominantly Black districts. And there's this whole tale about, for instance, William Barr starting back in September, falsely alleging that mail-in voting was fraught with risk of fraud and coercion. Then goes on to talk about what happened afterward and the challenges, so-called illegal votes in places like Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Detroit, Atlanta, which of course had majority Black populations. And of course, we won't even talk about what happened on January 6th. And I look at these first couple of pages and can't help but look at then what is happening since that election, the 2020 election, and the efforts to suppress, which happened actually before, but now they really are determined to just never let 2020 election happen again where they don't win. Just let's start off with that and your reaction to that.
Well, this week, there was an article in the New York Times, I suspect other newspapers, about the 2020 census. Yeah. And so this thing was not just a single focus. They had multiple prongs in the fire.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, and the census, it's interesting because it's semi-backfired. There's a serious undercount, as you know, among people of color. Right. But there also was a backfire in that those red states where, they hold sway, were undercounted. So they're going to lose some seats there. But ultimately, there is a suspicion that the 2020 census undercounted people of color by about 5%, which if you think about, that's a lot. I may have that percentage wrong, but it's in that area. And so there's likely to be less representation of Black, Latino, Asian, Native Americans, Asian Pacific, all those people in the House. And let's not talk about the Senate.
Yeah.
So anyway, but as you rightly pointed out, this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for quite a while. And as I like to point out, we talk about being the oldest democracy in the world, which is of course not true. If you look at the fact that until 1965, people of color really couldn't vote in this country. And it's only after that. And of course, at the same time, that's when the Republican Party started to seriously ramping up this thing to disenfranchise people of color's votes.
Right. And there's a historical context that they talk about here in the book, and going back obviously to, what they begin to talk about is John C. Calhoun, who the chief statesman in the 19th century of the planter class, who was a committed advocate for slavery and the intellectual forefather of the Confederacy. And what was interesting was, well, of course, and Trump carrying in that tradition, but what was interesting was the talking about what began, and it's just historical stuff. So looking at John C. Calhoun, then looking at the modern day version of this idea of nullification, the idea of creating this sense of illegitimacy of people of color, particularly Black people, in voting. And what began, for instance, there's this great quote here, what began with a birther crusade, is about talking about Obama, ended with the charge that Barack Obama's America itself was illegitimate and that could not hold power.
Right.
And there's just this whole thing of like, if we remember correctly, if I remember correctly, after Obama's election, the idea that an African American was in the White House really set everybody off, including the creation of the Tea Party. I mean, we all forget those early days of his administration where it all began in Texas. A lot of it began in Texas. But I mean, there were like signs, calling for his hanging. There were signs that said things like, when they said something about, God, I wish I could remember this quote, they don't call it a White House for nothing. When they say White House, they really mean White House. That wasn't the quote, but it was something like that. Let's jump back, if we could, to talk about, this is on page 198, and this whole historical thing about John C. Calhoun, and it was from South Carolina, and this idea of nullification, this idea that individual states can decide which federal laws to pass and not pass. Any thoughts?
Well, that takes us up to the 21st century when, there was a 10th January 6th, which is what that was all about, was to throw it to the House.
Nullification.
Yeah, right, to throw it to the states, to let those states say that the electors who were properly voted in were illegitimate, would nullify those, and then have those states' houses, which were heavily Republican, then cast votes for Trump, electoral votes for Trump. I mean, that's nothing more than that. I'm going to be interested in seeing, because I believe the committee will be starting their broadcast this Thursday. It's going to be in primetime TV.
Yeah.
I'm going to be interested in seeing how much they delve into the nullification attempt. I think they're serious. I mean, some of the stuff I've been reading is they're serious about pointing out those characters who did such things as allow members of the Proud Boys and others, gave them access to the Capitol, the proposed hanging. I shouldn't laugh, but was what they proposed. I mean, this was all a coordinated effort. And from what I'm reading and what's been leaked, I think they've got the documentation. I noticed that, a number of like Jordan and also his, the guy from Peter Navarro are refusing to testify. So they've been served with contempt. And I hope they really serve time in jail for it.
Well, he's been, Navarro this morning was indicted.
Okay.
By a federal grand jury. I don't want to hang too long about this January 16th, but I do need to make this comment that I really do expect there's going to be disruption of the hearings by Republicans.
Of course.
I don't mean the Republicans on the committee. I'm talking about Republicans are going to come into the chamber and they're going to do everything possible to disrupt it. Because I guess you can actually sit in on hearings, even though you're not part of that committee. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Well, just one last note on that too, because then we obviously need to move on, but it's just simply going to be an indictment, the self-indictment, if they do that.
Yeah, but
I mean, they had an opportunity. This is where I think that this whole thing rests on. They had an opportunity to comprise a minority of that committee. They chose not to. And that's widely known. So if they come in and be disruptive, refusing their key members of the House Republican leadership refuse to fight, it further indicts them. And I think in the public's eye.
Yeah. I want to kind of still get back to this idea of the historical. Let me just read a couple of things here that I thought were really interesting when we're talking about Calhoun specifically, but of course there was many other people who had the same, and how they rationalize. I mean, this is again back to this idea that white supremacy, but it even goes deeper than white supremacy. It also goes to this whole idea of class and who gets to vote. So, for instance, in South Carolina, statewide office was restricted to wealthy property owners.
Yeah.
To even qualify for governorship, you needed a large debt-free estate. Rich enslavers were essentially the only people who could participate in its highest levels of government. So to the extent that there were popular elections, they were for the lowest levels of government because the state legislature tended to appoint most high-level offices. And this is really going back, obviously, to the beginning of this country, is this idea of you had to be white, you had to be of a certain land-owning class, you had to be parts of the elite, which I think about it, when you hear Republicans talk about the elites, and what they, the big city elites, and they use that as some kind of an insult against Democrats. I think to myself, wait a second. This country is full of mostly white land-owning elites being the ruling class. And if you look at how many millionaires there are in the Senate, for instance, who are Republicans, not that there aren't some Democratic, but the fact is that they keep talking about elites when they are the elite.
Yeah, but it's a talking point, and it resonates.
It resonates.
That's the thing. That's a talking point. It resonates. But this whole thing about who gets to vote in terms of economics, into the 20th century, there was something called a poll tax.
Yeah.
And, you had to pay the poll tax. That's how they kept people that they did not want to vote out. And most of those, of course, were poor people who couldn't pay the tax, be they black and white. But if it came to their advantage to have poor whites vote, they let poor whites vote. It's always been about the money and about the class, even though we say we're a class-free society. That's couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, I don't even know. Does anybody even say that anymore?
Yeah, yes. What you'll hear people say, it's sort of a hidden code. They say that we're middle class. And most of these people who go around preaching that, we're just here for the middle class are multimillionaires. And part of that is this whole thing that to expand, quote unquote, the middle class and to wrap themselves in that cloak. But it's what we've done in this country forever.
I want to continue this on the vein about nullification, because this book really spends a lot of time talking about it, and because I really think that this is where we're headed. That as more and more states are taken over by Republicans, and I'm talking about from the governorship down to local offices, they talk about this whole section on page 201, where it says Calhoun built an entire theory of government. Seeing the threat democracy posed to slavery, he set out to limit democracy. Does any of this ring true today? To do so, he employed a novel conception of the Constitution. For Calhoun, there was no union per se. Instead, the United States was simply a compact among sovereigns with distinct and often competing sectional interests. This compact could survive only if all sides had equal say about the meaning of the Constitution and the shape and structure of the law. This idea that the Union could only act with the assent of the entire whole, what Calhoun called the concurrent majority. This was in opposition to the Madisonian idea of rule by numerical majority, albeit mediated by compromise and consensus. And why I think that's important is you hear more and more people talk about this idea that what is being set up is where the minority rules, where even though it maybe look like a majority of states, if you look at it, they may be, in some cases, purple states, but they have red form governments that rule over them. So it doesn't even matter whether you have more Democrats in a state because of gerrymandering. You can end up with with Republican legislatures and governors. And this is where I think we're sort of really good at doing, and Republicans. And I'm just wondering, the first real test will be in 2022 this year. But what I worry about is what's going to happen between 2022 and 24 if they don't win the majority in the House and the Senate, and how desperate they're going to get to make sure that that doesn't happen in 2024.
Yeah, they will be desperate. And like most of the stuff, you have to take a long view. There's, of course, a short view, but you have to take a long view. I fault Democrats for allowing this to happen. It was like they saw Republicans going into states, and they saw that they organized there. Simple. They organized against a principle. The principle, as you said, was
they started back in 2000.
Of course. And for whatever reasons, I would love to hear that from a Democratic strategist, why they ignored what was happening, but they ignored it. The good news is that now that they're aware of it and they're strategizing. They're going after states and their state legislatures. And yeah, gerrymandering works. We can prove it. But one of the things that's come out so far in these elections that precede the midterms is that basically trying to suppress the vote brings out people, and it brings out the people you may not have wanted to bring out. Certainly, it's true in the case of Georgia. And I think it's going to be a template as well. We're harkening back to the days of the early civil rights movement, when it's also kind of like human nature. If you tell people they can't do something, they're apt to want to do it more than ever. And one of the reasons why the Republicans were able to take over these state legislatures is because Democrats got complacent. We won. Hey, we got the right to vote. People start saying, so, hey, voting. And I've heard this from friends. What does my vote matter? It doesn't matter. Well, we found out that votes do matter. Voting matters, but it got us Trump, and it got us these Republicans. I also believe that, and I don't understand the dynamics totally behind this, but the Republicans have totally overreached. They've overreached with abortion. They're going to get that victory, but it may be a hollow one. If it brings out women and independence, it's going to be hollow. The other part of this that is, I think you're just going to see bubbling from the surface, you're already seeing this, is this staunch opposition to any kind of gun safety, any kind of law against, just common sense laws against gun safety. It ain't going to stop. People are going to be killed. And what do? If you're a Republican, you just dig your heels in. You start losing those suburban moms.
I'm sorry. I'm sort of laughing on that last point, because you'll see in a lot of polls, uh, below the economy and inflation, crime
Mm-hmm.
be an issue, and we see this locally, where we see, in the primary, that this idea that we have to address crime. It is actually across the country, and so there's a piece in the Times today talking about how even Democrats are having to face that issue. And what are they doing? They're starting to, well, not starting. They've been doing it for a long time. They're now, this idea that we've got to deal with law enforcement in light of the last 2 years. Well, all of a sudden they're changing their tunes and going, well, what we need is more police. What we need is more, crackdowns on. They're just repeating the same talking points that the Republicans are doing, because they know that fear factor works.
Yeah.
And
But
so now
maybe,
that they're now each trying to out fear each other. Oh, I know I've got a better solution to deal with crime. I've got a better solution. I don't need 50. I want 100. I want 300. And let's
but
bring in some tanks too while we're at it.
yeah, but maybe, Antonio, this whole new awareness on a national level of mass murders by young men with military-grade weapons, that's crime. That's crime on a massive scale.
I know.
Okay. And here is the thing,
But I think people can't separate that. I think
true.
it's that, and then they look over here and they go, "Yeah, but my house is being robbed."
But here's the reality.
And so two different issues for
crime
them.
is still at historic low, regardless. Okay.
You wouldn't know that from some of the rhetoric I hear.
Of course, because politicians have used that in years past to get elected. Politicians are like, they're like lemmings in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's like if one wins something, and one way they'll go, everybody goes that way, and it's follow the leader, not be a leader. And this gun thing, I'm still saying, these mass killings are going to continue, and the more they happen, particularly the stauncher the Republicans are about not doing even just things like raising the limit to 21 years of age, making it, abolishing these high capacity weapons that are for military use only. That is just simply, you look at the numbers of polls. Again, the majority of Americans believe there should be some kind of gun laws in place. If nothing else, background checks, raising the age. Okay, Republicans in the main are against that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that one of the underlying things about the whole gun thing that I continuously hear from that side is this idea of government. We need these guns. They don't care. They weave this thing, which goes back to this book. And interestingly, this idea that we need, what they really mean is white people need, to protect ourselves from a government that will oppress us. But there's this other side that they're not honest enough about, is this idea that we need to protect them from what is beginning to happen in this country, which is this idea of replacement. And there's this, in the book, they talk about, I'll read the paragraph because it's so true. There's a homegrown ideology of reaction in the United States, inextricably tied to our system of slavery. And while that ideology no longer carries the explicit racism of the past, the basic framework remains: fear of rival political majorities, of demographic replacement, of a government that threatens privilege and hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
We need the guns.
Yeah.
We need the guns to protect ourselves from those people.
Okay, let me point to an opposite movement. And I think which is again race-based. Back when drugs and the war on drugs was in place, people didn't care about the abuses. People didn't care that the whole-scale mass incarceration was taking place because it was in only those communities, certain communities, where they said it was high crime, and we don't care because we can turn a blind eye to it. The moment drugs reached into suburban communities, particularly Republican communities, it stopped being a crime. It became a illness. It became something that one should not be thrown in prison. One should be given a cure.
Right.
Okay, that's racist. But people don't understand it's racist. They just see it as part of our just part of what America is. But now, because guns were proliferated in Black neighborhoods, Black and Latino neighborhoods, and we can talk about the reasons for that later. But they proliferated, and as long as those guns stayed there, and cops had wholesale shoot to kill orders, which they do, it was not a problem. However, what is happening now, which I think changes this whole issue, is that as it did with drugs, those high capacity rifles, that gun violence is seeping out of Black and brown communities and going to white suburban communities. And now there's not just a fear that, which is long festered in Black and brown communities. There's a fear now festering in white, rural, and suburban communities that I'm not safe on the streets because might be a lone gunman out there. And that's taken a while to ramp up, but it's ramping up now. And that's what you see now. And I would submit that kind of what's going on in Uvalde, and particularly given the ill preparedness of the police force, it's going to be kind of like a scene in later view, a turning point. And because one good thing is you can't hide this stuff anymore. And it has been hidden.
The problem is, or the challenge is, how do you turn? I just think that there's several things going on here. I think you're right. People will at some point, but it goes back to how do you keep us safe? How do you keep us safe from mass murderers? How do you keep us? Then there's how you keep us safe from crime, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But in the end, it's still going to be about who controls the political apparatus to deal with these things. I just think, and I mean, I hate to be so pessimistic about this, but Jim Jordan screaming at a hearing about, I think it was Jim Jordan, who was one of them, talking about how you must think we don't have no hearts. When talking about gun control and the need to protect our children, I just think in the end, they want to maintain power. And so, yes, they may throw a few crumbs that in that area, but in the end, they're just not going to do anything to, particularly with a Democratic, Congress, where they're the minority, with a Senate where they literally control it because you need 10 Republicans to really do anything. I just think this is all about political power.
Of course it is.
I just think that in the end, and it talks about it in this book, is that they have embraced a long view that this is about. I love this line here. Republicans have embraced a view that holds voting majorities as well as entire constituencies illegitimate if they don't support Republican candidates for office. So yeah, they may give some lip service to, we really do care about the children, but to do so would be to even go in that area would be somehow threatening their long view of what we need to do to maintain to get complete, or at least majority, political control in this country, even though we're a minority. And I just think that that's all they're intent on. That's all that they're focused on.
Of course it is. But the thing is not, and this is where we have some point of difference. It's starting to be a fact that they're overreaching. And I keep going back. Authoritarian governments have that one thing in common: they overreach, and that's what this Republican, whatever you want to call it, government or party is about. It's about overreaching. They've overreached, and they also are aware of something. They're aware that the media can shine a light and change public opinion, which is one of the reasons why Trump was brilliant in this regard, calling it fake news. And that was part, because you don't want people to know what's really going on. But the thing is very illustrative again about this Uvalde mass murder is that what is happening now? They have police, state police, bikers are united to keep the press out. And there's a real reason for that. The reason has nothing to do with the feelings of those who were killed or those who are mourning. The fact is, you put a blight on this stuff, and they fear that it's changing things. And I think it is already changing minds.
Yeah.
And again, I can't state this enough. It is Republicans are a minority. They have to hold. They not only have to hold their own 27 to 30%, 27, 37%, but they also have to get some of those independents, enough independents, no matter where they are, except for the really deepest, reddest areas. They had enough of those independents to go with them in order to rule. And that's at risk now.
Yeah. I just because I look at it in the historical context, and I look at it where the next 2 years are going to be critical.
Yes.
Where there's cases making their way through the Supreme Court right now, and that will go before the Supreme Court, talking about the power of state legislators to vote, whether it's voter suppression laws or whether it's the way they pick electors. I think that's the most interesting thing is the amount of people who were running both in the primaries and who are going to be running in the general elections for secretaries of state to control the elections, and legislatures rewriting laws so they can pick the electors. So my point is, you might be right about all this, about the media attention, the backlash. If you just stack the deck enough so that you're bulletproof, I think, like I said, a lot will be determined in 2022 and also between 2022 and 2024.
Yeah.
This is the real test about where we come at the other end.
I agree. I don't disagree one iota with anything you said. I go back in time, look at history. I look at what happened, particularly in the South, when we're talking pre-civil rights days, what those people, the Freedom Riders, the bombings in the church, the lynchings, they went through, and that was state-sponsored terrorism. And that, you put that up against what we're up against now, and I'm sorry, it doesn't hold a candle to what they did, what people had to do in order to bring democracy to the South, bring democracy. Okay, so this backlash, and this is what it is. It's backlash, continuing backlash for 50 years. And it didn't start with Obama became a figurehead for it in many of the months, but it preceded Obama.
Yeah,
look at Barry
Goldwater. Yeah,
Goldwater. Look at Barry Goldwater. And you look at Ronald Reagan. They were. to the extent that they were dog whistling, and Trump was like bullhorning it. It's a different story. But
bullhorning, that's good.
But there is a continuous line. And I just keep maintaining, which is why I have optimism. If those people, those activists, are able to overcome that in a country that was staunchly anti-Black, anti-people of color, then why is this going to be different?
I'll give you assume for a minute, your favorite friend, Peter Navarro,
yes,
was on MSNBC. And talking about, in his histrionic way, what would happen if the Republicans take over the House and the Senate?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like this blueprint that they fantasize about, about everything from impeachment to disruption to rooting out all those people. Think about those forces joining with the Republican legislators, and again, between 2022 and 2024, creating enough of a mechanism to disrupt the elections in 24, in their eyes, to guarantee that a Republican goes to the White House.
Yeah. But think about this, Antonio, and this is
again, and I'm just pointing out that this is all part of a historical.
It's a wet dream that they have. These people have. Okay.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think it's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic. But here's the problem, or what do you want to call it? However you want to define it. So you do that. You form, instead of having a democracy, you form whatever you want to call it, or a form of government you want to call it, government by minority rules majority. It's as if you're just making a statement, you're thinking this is going to happen without any kind of pushback, without any kind, and understand, what people misunderstand about this shit is that you're going to have people who are going to be angry. And those angry people, Democrats have in Republicans' minds, right-wing Republicans, Democrats are cowards. Liberals are cowards. That's the mindset.
We've done a good job of standing by and letting it happen.
Yeah, but But what's going to happen is if this dream of theirs takes place, there's going to be rebellion, and not in anyone's interest. And this is what we're going back to. You've got a ruling class here that does quite well with the system the way it is in place. In fact, they do even better than it would be if it's a system which is what these hard right people want. Okay, so I just say, okay, if it does happen, and you may be very well right, let's take that viewpoint, the viewpoint that there is a right-wing coup d'etat, whatever you want to call it, like what Trump wanted to do. Let's just say that and follow through. Let's say Trump had, in fact, performed a coup d'etat. Let's in fact say that Trump had been installed as president, and maybe even Pence as vice president. What do you think would have happened? You think that would have just gone down, just easy? Do you think it would have just set people, those being?
I mean, and I don't even think the military. There's probably elements of the military that might have supported them. I think there's a lot. I think they would have found much more support from law enforcement.
Yeah.
But it's not whether or not it's
the military got to worry about.
I'm not suggesting that it would be successful in terms of it would last more than a day or two. I think that it's the disruption, and what I worry about also to some extent is the acquiescence of people who are not part of the political process, who don't vote, who are more preoccupied by everything from the challenges of daily living, to those who would rather, participate in the popular culture than in the voting political culture. I think there'd be chaos. Now, it'd be
Yes, it would be.
interesting. You touch on something. You mentioned something that's very interesting. Is I just cannot see corporations who, like you said, are used to a certain. I mean, the disruption to Wall Street, disruption to the corporate structures in this country. I'm not sure that they would be.
Yeah, it's not. It's instability.
They would go along with it.
The instability that would wreck would be put every corporation. I would say every corporation. Let me rephrase that. Would put your Fortune 500 corporations at opposed to it. Okay? That simple as that. Their money is threatened. Their dominance is threatened.
Right.
That's the and not to mention.
Wouldn't that be ironic?
Yeah. Not to mention the military. I mean, here's a prototype for this. So in Florida, DeSantis has basically put in these draconian laws against, for example, biggest corporation in Florida, which happens to be Disney.
Disney, yeah.
Because they somehow or another displeased them.
Yeah.
Okay. You'd see that throughout this country, that there would be those who would try that. That ain't gonna fly. I'm sorry. It ain't flying. It won't fly. This country was built not on the rule of law, but on the rule of money, the rule of corporate. It would, of course, it probably been called corporate then, but it certainly was about, and slavery was certainly a part of that, capitalism.
Right.
It's just the two, particularly in the 21st century, the two don't coexist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And particularly the brand of authoritarianism that these hard right wingers have in mind. It does not. And I'll go so far as to say is this. This whole idea of abortions, I was alive when you couldn't get an abortion. I also know, I saw, because I had friends that were white who got pregnant and had to get an abortion. Now, most of them were able to get abortions because their parents had enough money to get them in hospitals where they could have abortion, what they call DNC, dusting and cleaning. That's what they refer to.
Right.
But when you're now, what you've done is you're criminalizing a group of people who have some power. It's going to be an interesting dynamic going forward. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is this ain't a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
And two, I think they overreached.
I want to end with reading this section of the closing pages of the chapter on politics, because it's a great summary. Mm-hmm. It talks about Republicans stepped onto this path as an opposition movement after America elected its first Black president, and they thereafter embraced a racist demagogue and his attacks on the legitimacy of the nation's multiracial character. These actions speak to how the threads of history tie past and present together. While neutral on their face, these methods, the assaults on the legitimacy of non-white political actors, the casting of rival political majorities as unrepresentative, the drive to nullify democratically elected governing coalitions are downstream of ideas and ideologies that came to fruition in the defense of human bondage and racial segregation. And even though we're not enslaving people today, in their crazy far-right perspective, this is about they're seeing themselves as victims, them seeing themselves as the chickens have come home to roost, and that this idea that of this country being transformed into a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural America means that they will lose political power.
But let's look at the
And
reality.
in the end, that's what they fear the most.
Yeah, I agree. But look at the reality of it. Demographics have shifted. What are they going to do? I mean, I say they, I'm speaking of this mindset of the far right who say replacement theory, the replacement. What are they going to do to prevent that from happening? I mean, you have to, if you're going to,
They think that they can still hold on to power.
Yeah, but then, I mean, what does that buy you? I mean,
I don't know what the end game. I can't figure out the end game. They'd have to kill all of us.
Yeah, and here's the thing, that won't happen. Okay, so I keep going back to. I mean, first of all, much of this, in my humble belief, stands for pipe dreams by certain elected officials to continue to get elected. Yeah. They no more want what these people in that far right fringe groups want to come to pass. They only see as a pathway to keep them in their orbit, so that they can they can depend upon them for votes. And even if there are those elected officials who do believe in that stuff, and there are some, I maintain, let it, when it happens, if it happens, what do they end up with? I mean, it's are you talking about a civil war? Are we talking about Beirut here? We're talking about Beirut. We're talking about a second civil war. I mean, that's where this thing.
I think some of them believe that, but I'm not sure. I just can't see, like, everybody. Look at the neighborhoods we live in.
The what? Look at the what?
The neighborhoods we live in.
Yes.
Can you? I mean, do you think folks are considering a civil war? I mean, they're not.
No, certainly not.
But again, this is the. I love your this wet dream fantasy. I mean, this is the craziness that we hear now. Whether it's as close to reality or not doesn't matter. It's just anyway. Yeah. I want to stop there because we could keep going on forever about this issue. I think that you keep bringing up something that I want us to kind of make a thread from now on, and that is that in the end, all of this revolves around the idea of capitalism.
Yeah.
And any threats to that capitalism, whether from the right or left, it's just is guaranteed to create chaos and a backlash.
Well, here's the thing. Anything that's a threat to capitalism, particularly those who are in power, they're going to do every tip they have. They will do everything in their power to cut it off at the root. Okay? Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't matter who that's coming from, the left or the right.
Right.
It's been proven in the past. I see no difference going forward. It's as one of the rappers said, it's all about the money.
Yeah. Well, as usual, great words. Thank you very much. This has been a great episode on politics from the book, The 1619 Project. See you next week.
Take care.
Thank you.